Hello and welcome to the next part of your course. So by now, hopefully you've had a chance to familiarize yourself with the pre-scene. We're going to move now into the industry analysis component, and we're going to be looking at the real world industry in terms of the impact of tech on the auto industry and how self-driving and autonomous technology in particular is really coming to the forefront of the auto industry. So before I begin with the content itself, let me just give you an overview of what we're going to be looking at. So first, I'll give you a quick overview and review of the company background that we're dealing with in this pre-scene. I'm then going to go straight into the real world case. I'm going to look at a number of different companies in this industry and comparing and contrasting their different views, their different strategies, and how they compare then as well with the pre-scene company of AutoAuto. And it's a really interesting industry in many ways because these are very, very forward-looking companies, all of them very innovative and constantly making changes, constantly adapting, constantly forming new partnerships and alliances. So a very dynamic industry is the auto supply industry, specifically from the tech point of view. So we're going to be looking in some detail at these various companies. And then we're going to move into the macro view. We're going to be looking at some sales trends and growth trends within the broader auto industry, because of course the industry that we're looking at sits within the broader car manufacturing industry, and we'll see how that might impact on things like demand and so on. We'll move from there then into some recent controversies, because this is of course a very cutting edge and pioneering area of the auto industry that we're looking at. And there have been, as a result, many controversies. There are many unknowns within the industry. And we're going to be looking at these in some detail, because for a company like AutoAuto that's always trying to innovate, it's going to be very important to try to balance this with some caution, with one eye on the regulatory framework, on liability issues and so on. And this is a very important, and especially from the point of view as well as of IP and patents and things like that, it's very, very prudent for such a company to have a very strong kind of legal basis and legal perspective. So we'll be going through some of those issues in section 4, and we'll move from there then to the broader regulatory framework. And we'll look at how governments are trying to deal with these new technologies and how that might affect then a company like AutoAuto in terms of its longer term strategy. And that'll bring us then to the end of our analysis. Okay, so let's begin with the pre-scene company, a quick review. Hopefully you've already had a chance to look at them, but it's worth having just a quick review so that we're familiar with what kind of company we're dealing with and how it compares and contrasts with some of the real world cases. So the name is AutoAuto, founded in 2002. Based in a country called Upland. We're not told much else about the country. We've no idea whether it's North America, Europe, or what region we're dealing with here. It specializes in computer tech for cars and disruptive technologies in particular. We'll come back to that point later. It both sells and licenses technology to car manufacturers. Again, this is very important from the legal perspective and from the IP perspective as well. And we'll come back to these issues later on. It does not sell in retail or aftermarket capacity. That is to say, it does not supply its technologies directly to customers or car customers. It only deals with business-to-business clients, and it doesn't supply parts, for example, to repair shops or anything like that. So we're dealing strictly with a relationship between AutoAuto and auto manufacturing companies. And it does not have its own factories. Important to remember that it subcontracts its manufacturing to other companies. Okay, so they're the most important points, I think, from an industrial point of view. So we're going to move straight into the real world, and we're starting with a company called TomTom. Now, this is perhaps an obvious place to start, given the clue that's in the name of AutoAuto. You have that repetition, and that seems to signal, or at least be a nod towards, the real-world company of TomTom. Now, there are important differences as well, and really, I think it's a stronger case can be made that AutoAuto is is based on a mixture of real-world companies of different kinds, and we'll see why in a few moments. So TomTom is a Dutch tech company that specializes in car navigation systems, as you're probably already aware. It's a very, very famous brand name when it comes to satellite navigation. It was founded in 1991 by Peter Frans Pauwels, Corine Vigouroux, Peter Gielen and Harold Godjian. No doubt I've butchered those names, but anyway. So if you remember from the pre-scene, there were 3 founders originally of the AutoAuto company, and here we see four founders as well in the case of TomTom, just 4. In 2004, they launched the first and now famous personal navigation device, or as it's also known, the PND, the TomTom Go. Probably one of the most famous navigation devices ever created. However, TomTom is much more diversified than AutoAuto. So this is one of the really crucial differences, because in the pre-scene we see that AutoAuto is very much hyper-focused on producing car navigation technologies and intelligence systems for car manufacturers, and that's its exclusive focus. Whereas with TomTom, they have over the years diversified, and they've focused on other products like smart watches and things like that, for example. And so they have 4 business units since 2015 officially. They have a consumer unit, automotive, licensing, and telematics. So the consumer unit then is dealing with products and producing products that are being sold directly to consumers, like the smartwatch that I mentioned earlier. The automotive then obviously is dealing with auto manufacturers and selling their products to those manufacturers. In the case then of licensing, this is about similar to AutoAuto, I should say. TomTom is licensing some of its products to manufacturers, not just selling them directly. And then the telematics actually deals with the research and development side, the actual technology, dealing with maps and intelligent maps and these kinds of navigation systems, which are becoming increasingly sophisticated. So they've dedicated a whole department to that on its own. So it's not clear whether or not AutoAuto would be looking into some kind of diversification, or perhaps splitting its operational structure in this way. But we'll see other examples of companies now that are a little bit closer in terms of their structuring and strategy to AutoAuto. Partnered with Bosch in 2015, TomTom, to develop some self-driving mapping technology. So we're seeing an awful lot of partnerships in this sector, and a lot of changing partnerships as well, as we'll see further on. So a very, very dynamic sector. Another company which is perhaps a little bit closer in terms of its structure and the way that it works is 5AI. And 5AI is a tech company, startup based in the UK. It was founded by 3 founders similar to AutoAuto: Stan Boland, Steve Allpress, and John Redford. It was incorporated officially in 2016, so this is really a very recent company, in fact more recent than AutoAuto. It's pursuing the highest level of autonomy in urban areas, and this is what's known as level 5 autonomy in the industry. I'm going to come back to this leveling later on and explain to you exactly what the difference is between the different levels. It goes from level 1 to 5, and it's a way of ranking the self-driving capacities of different cars. Now, instead of using traditional 3D prior mapping, this 5AI company is really interesting in that they are focusing exclusively on AI systems, that is artificial intelligence, as you could probably guess from the name, 5AI. So they're moving away from the kind of traditional mapping of companies like TomTom and the kind of satellite navigation, and they're more heavily relying on the sensor of the car mixing and collaborating with artificial intelligence systems within the car, reacting and responding to obstacles outside the system. So 3D mapping isn't really where they are. It's almost exclusively on the AI side, and its interpretation and anticipation of environmental movements and what those different environmental movements mean. So there's a lot of kind of semantics going on here, and it's a very, very complex and highly advanced area is the AI. And a huge amount of research and development going on here. Unsurprisingly, perhaps 10 of their 18 team members are PhDs in various areas. A lot of engineers and a lot of cognitive science and artificial intelligence specialists as well. And this is quite typical of this sector. You're seeing a huge amount of academic collaboration, and in many cases these companies are actually starting out as academic research projects, which then expand into something that is actually implementable and that could be saleable, I should say. So that's 5AI, perhaps a little bit more like the pre-scene company of AutoAuto, in the sense that they're more exclusively focused on these autonomous systems and collaborating then with auto manufacturers. Another company which is perhaps a little bit more like AutoAuto is called Mobileye. And they say here on their website, as you can see, the world leader in collision avoidance systems, saving lives, protecting your fleet, and reducing costs. Okay, so they are, again, very similar to AutoAuto in the sense that they're looking and focusing exclusively on these navigation systems for car companies that they can then sell to car manufacturers. They were founded in Israel in 1999 by Amnon Shashua, and he evolved his university research into a vision system that could detect vehicles using only camera algorithms. So again, we're dealing here in a kind of proto-artificial intelligence area. They formed a partnership with Tesla in 2015, which very quickly ended in 2016 after a big controversy, which we're going to come back to in section 4. It was acquired by Intel just this year, 2017, and now they are all collaborating with BMW to produce autonomous vehicles for consumer market by 2021. That is to say, fully autonomous vehicles for consumer market by 2021. That's just 4 years away. So you're looking at really ambitious targets here. And as we'll see, this is a hyper-competitive sector. Google, unsurprisingly perhaps, have a stake in this as well. Their subsidiary is called Waymo, and it was actually created by Google with the express purpose of focusing on these kinds of technologies in 2016. Before Google was itself actually invested and in the research and development of self-driving technologies, but they've since kind of outsourced it to its own created subsidiary in Waymo, and they now have exclusive focus on these kinds of technologies. Alphabet, by the way, just in case you're wondering, is actually the parent company of Google, which was relatively recently incorporated as well. So Waymo is officially a subsidiary of Alphabet rather than a subsidiary of Google, because Google, of course, is just one company within the Alphabet group. So it's exclusively focused on creating fully self-driving vehicles, has largely been in collaboration with Toyota, and as we'll see, a lot of these companies, these tech companies, have been kind of focusing or pitching their technologies to particular car manufacturing companies. And you see a lot of these partnerships being formed. So in the case of Google, it's Toyota that they have been collaborating mostly with. And they've recently been involved in a very interesting trade secrets dispute with Uber, which we're going to look at further on. A very, very controversial case. And I think it's very, very important and sheds a lot of light on the nature of this sector and how it relates with the auto industry as a whole. Tesla then is, again, one of the most important companies in this sector, and Tesla has been rolling out recently its autopilot system, and the autopilot system is at the moment a kind of semi-autonomous system. It's more of a driver aid, and it gives kind of assistance to the drivers, but it is approaching autonomy, and it's a very, very one of the front runners really in terms of actually getting its systems on the road. And it's really it's very interesting in the sense that it's using software updates to approach full autonomy. So at least Tesla claims that the hardware is actually already in place. They have the cameras and the onboard technology, and all they need to do is just tweak the software a little bit. And what they do is they allow for consumers, that is to say the car drivers, to actually update their autopilot system through a Wi-Fi connection just in their house or wherever they can find a Wi-Fi signal, and they can simply overnight install these new software updates, and it will increasingly get the autopilot system closer and closer to full autonomy. So new functionalities are being added all the time. However, hardware limitations do remain an issue, as we'll see subsequently, and it's questionable whether or not the most recent Tesla model is actually equipped with a sufficient hardware to roll out a fully autonomous unit eventually. So this is something that Tesla are really going to have to think long and hard about, and it's not clear that they're there yet, and they may be a little bit premature in promising full autonomy with the current hardware that they have. So as I mentioned earlier, there are these 5 levels of autonomy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you this very quick video, which nicely kind of captures the differences between the different levels, because explaining it just verbally, it might not be sufficient. This illustrative video is a good way of actually understanding the differences between the 5 levels. Now, perhaps if it hasn't already become apparent, this technology in reaching full autonomy, it's actually a little bit more complicated than it seems perhaps at first glance, and I'm going to explain exactly why that's the case. One of the biggest challenges in this system or in this sector, I should say, is finding a system that distinguishes threatening from non-threatening objects on the road. So, for example, you can imagine if you're driving down the road and you see a bag of trash blowing out in front of you or some light debris on the ground. In most cases, you will simply keep on driving and you won't make emergency stops or you won't slam on the brakes. And birds, for example, crossing your path might be another one of these kinds of obstacles. They're non-threatening and they don't require emergency evasive action. Now, for a self-driving technology, this is actually quite tricky to distinguish these objects from, for example, threatening objects like trucks or other cars or people moving out in front of you. So this is something that at the moment is really being worked hard on by these companies, and it takes an awful lot of know-how, an awful lot of sophisticated artificial intelligence and sensoring systems and feedbacks and so on to actually get this right. So that's one of the areas and one of the obstacles in the way of fully autonomous or level 5 autonomy at the moment. Other complications for these kinds of systems are pedestrians, as I mentioned, determining whether or not something is actually a pedestrian or if it's just some inanimate object. Traffic lights, how to interact with traffic light systems, for example. Police diversions, if these are in place on a road, for example, if there's been an accident, how do these intelligent systems respond to these kinds of obstacles? Roadworks as well, of course, and potholes. A surprisingly difficult one for these systems to deal with is potholes. If you come across a big pothole, in most cases a human driver will be able to see these potholes ahead and take evasive action that's not too drastic. Whereas with these self-driving vehicles, often what's happening is they're either unable to detect the potholes, and in the case of big potholes that can obviously cause problems, potential damage to the cars, for example. Or if they are able to detect these potholes, often the evasive action that they take is out of proportion to the threat posed by the pothole. So again, these are actually surprisingly complex issues to deal with. And so this is why there's such a huge amount of investment, because in order to reach this goal of full autonomy, these are very, very labor intensive, expertise intensive problems that have to be overcome. It's also a legal minefield, as we'll see further on. Who is liable in the case of accidents, for example, and of course intellectual property rights are a really, really hot topic in this area. And what constitutes a violation of intellectual property, because after all, a lot of these technologies are in many ways similar. They're relying on similar combinations of technologies, for example, combining mapping systems with lasers, with algorithms, with artificial intelligence capacities and things like that. So the precise combination of these technologies, does it constitute a new technology, or is it something that's open source that can be used by anyone? So these are things that are being ironed out at the moment, and there's a huge amount of litigation going on in this sector, as we'll see below. And many insiders in the industry agree that this is actually a really complex area, and perhaps this might give you some cause to doubt the projections that are coming from some of the companies about how quickly they can get these fully autonomous cars to the consumer market. 2021 is perhaps a little bit ambitious in light of these kinds of complex issues. So Ash Hasib, a Senior Vice President for Auto and Home Insurance at LexisNexis Risk Solutions, says there is so much brain power that goes on when driving a car, so it will take a long time to teach a machine all the possible scenarios that could take place. Trying to get to the last 20% is going to take a very long time, he thinks. Okay, so he says 80% of the scenarios are relatively quick in terms of getting this technology working, and we've seen obviously prototypes already on the roads with these kinds of technologies, but trying to get to the last 20% is going to take a very long time. Now, the reason I'm focusing so much on full autonomy and self-driving technologies is of course because the stated ambition and strategy of the company in the pre-scene, AutoAuto, is to actually get cars driving themselves. And so this is where a lot of these companies that have been focusing on simply on the kind of isolated systems, satellite navigation systems, for example, in the past, they all seem to be now moving towards, inevitably, integrating all of these systems in such a way that they produce full autonomy. And this is where the industry really is going, it seems, unanimously. So, summary then of this section: AutoAuto seems to be a mix of these real-world companies that we've been looking at. It's a hyper-competitive and hyper-sophisticated sub-industry. Okay, so we're seeing these kind of really tech-savvy startups with a lot of research expertise taking on these giants like Google and Uber and Tesla, for example. So we're seeing a huge amount of money in this area, a huge amount of investment, and all these buyouts and acquisitions going on. These startups, they're in existence for a year, they're bought out by Intel or by Google and so on. So really hyper-competitive, dynamic and sophisticated sub-industry. Most OEMs, as we saw in the pre-scene, they mentioned the OEMs in driverless tech are tying themselves to specific car companies. So we're seeing alliances and partnerships with companies like BMW and Toyota and Tesla, for example. So companies like AutoAuto will perhaps be looking to form kind of stable partnerships with auto industry giants in order to roll out their new technologies and the pioneering technologies in particular. And of course, it's in the interests of car manufacturers to gain the kind of reputational benefits that would come from being a first mover in this area. So if they could be seen to be breaking ground, it could really bump their sales and do a lot for the reputation and a lot for investment as well. Now, the question for a company like AutoAuto is whether to diversify or specialize. This is a really crucial strategic question. And as we've seen within this sector, there is a lot of variation in this regard. So as we saw at the beginning, TomTom has over the years diversified, and they're producing other products and other product lines, as well as focusing on their kind of self-driving and autonomous technologies. Whereas companies and startups like 5AI, they're a little bit more aggressive, perhaps a little bit more specialized and kind of nerdy and geeky, I guess you could say, and they have this kind of this really hyper focus on this particular goal of reaching full autonomy. So there's two different approaches there, two different visions and strategies. It's an open question whether or not AutoAuto will go with one or the other, if they're going to stick to their guns and try and just reach that goal of full autonomy before anything else, put all their eggs in one basket. Or is it more prudent and a little bit safer perhaps to diversify like TomTom and try and branch out into other areas just in case that some other, one of its competitors, for example, gets to the full autonomy goal quicker than it does? It might affect its bottom line and it might cause it to lose a significant amount of money in investment if all of its reputation is staked on that one goal. You've got this startups versus giants structure as well within this sector. You've got huge investment going on. You've got Google, you've got Apple, you've got Uber, you've got Tesla, Intel, real giants, tech giants who are pouring a huge amount of money, and because they can and they've got a lot of capital. And then you've got these little aggressive dynamic startups with a huge amount of expertise, and often they're being absorbed, but in some cases they're sticking to their guns. And they're also really heavily invested in reaching this goal as quickly as possible. And of course, I suppose their advantage is that they're super focused and exclusively focused on just reaching this goal as quickly as possible, and they can move quicker perhaps than the investment giants can.